Welcome to A Place for Film, the IU Cinema podcast. On this week's episode, we're talking about cinema technology. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Andy Hunsucker.
And I'm Jason Thompson.
And on this week's episode, we've got Chris Eller with us, back for the 5th, 7th, 8th. I'm not sure how many times you've been on the show. Plenty.
I'm like whatever repeats, like a bad burrito. I'm a bad burrito.
You're in syndication.
Yes.
Do I get royalties for that?
No.
Yes. When we get royalties, you can have royalties as well.
Excellent.
So let's talk about cinema technology. Now, I think it was our 3rd episode that we did a Technology 101. That was about 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. Probably worth doing that again. So let's just define some terms for people. Mm-hmm. So just so people aren't sort of in the dark. The cinema can project on film 16 millimeter and 35 millimeter, and in
Correct.
A pinch, they can rig some stuff to do 8 millimeter as well.
Yes, they've done that.
They can manage that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the big difference is 16 millimeter. Is it the width of the film?
Correct.
Okay, so the big difference is resolution. So you have this little tiny image this big, and it looks pretty good, but you blow it up to much bigger, to basically double the size, and it looks way better. There's different aspect ratios. We'll talk more about that later. There's myriad aspect ratios that the cinema has to deal with. We don't do 70 millimeter. I get that question a lot.
It's very expensive, and they had the option. The Kineton, who makes the film projectors, does have a convertible that'll do 70 as well. But what's not clear to me is if you either have to choose 70 and 35 or 35 and 16, or if they've got one that does all three.
Yeah.
But there was, they have to fit within a budget.
Yeah.
So 70 was just out, and there's so few films that are shot in 70 anyway.
The Bradley collection, of course, being mostly 16. So
yeah, the 16 millimeter archives on this campus basically say you have to be able to shoot.
That drove it
to project in 16.
Yeah.
But the cinema can also project in digital formats.
That's right. They are fully what's called DCI compliant. So they are a DCI compliant D-cinema.
Yeah. So digital cinema, what does that mean?
Digital cinema means no film.
Yeah.
and they're using a digital projector and digital files. The file format is called a digital cinema package, a DCP for short. And they can, being DCI compliant, if they get the key to unlock a first run movie, it's called a KDM, a key delivery message. They could play a movie the same time opening night that AMC or Regal or any of the big cinemas around the world can play. They are fully compliant. It's just a matter of if they want to pay the public performance right. to get the key to play the movie.
Yeah. So the cinema can display in 2K and 4K. What are 2K and 4K? We throw those around a lot. So what does 2K and 4K mean?
That has to do with the number of horizontal pixels or the number of columns in the picture. And the DCI compliant aspect of the cinema is 2K. So that means that the picture is displayed in a 2K container that has a resolution of 2048 by 1080. So the 1080 is going to be similar to people because that's one of the high definition specifications, 1920 1080. But because of engineers at Kodak and their love for math, digital cinema is 2048 pixels wide.
Yes, because 2048 is
it's a power of 2.
Yes.
It had to do with when Kodak engineers were developing the Cineon film scanner, they made it 2K wide.
Yeah,
that's the history there, and it's stayed because cinema likes to differentiate itself a little bit, and you get a couple extra pixels, which is very nice. The movies come in set within that 2K container, depending on their aspect ratio, which you touched on earlier. If it's an Academy standard or flat or CinemaScope aspect ratio, it'll fit within that 2K container. Now, they do have a 4K projector. 4K is twice the resolution of 2K, which is 4 times the area. So it has a resolution of 4096 by 2160.
Yeah. So you hear 2K, 4K, you think it's – a lot of people think it's double, but it actually it's quadruple because it's like putting –
double in each dimension.
4 2K
It's exactly
things.
How it's done. The input to the 4K projector is 4 2K quadrants.
Yes.
Yeah. And just the image panel, it's a single image panel. So, the 2048th pixel in quadrant A is right next to the first pixel in quadrant B. There's no gap or seam or anything like that.
Yeah.
Is it to maybe explain to people just maybe more likely to go to a mainstream theater? 2K is what you're most likely going to see when it says digital presentation.
That is changing.
But it is changing, but that is sort of a common...
The default is going to be 2K.
2K,
well,
right.
If the cinema has been digital for a couple years now, they probably only bought a 2K projector because the 4K cinema projectors have really only become affordable recently. Well, projectors have an end of life. They have a useful life, and you need to refresh the equipment. And when you do, you end up getting the new stuff. So it's a leapfrog game with the equipment refresh. Now, it's entirely possible. This is the other fun thing about digital cinema is a 4K digital cinema package, because of the way DCPs are created, it has a 2K version inside of it. So they could have been shipped a 4K DCP, but if it was shown on a 2K projector, you would have still only just seen the 2K version right there. So that's a way that they are forward and backward compatible. And conversely, a 2K DCP projected on a 4K projector, the projector will scale it. And it'll actually look a little bit better than a 2K projector because it has twice as many pixels in it, well, 4 times as many pixels in it. And that smooths edges. It's an anti-aliasing effect. And so it can look a little more pleasing, even though it's not really more resolution if it's 2K.
Yeah. So we've talked about this Essential Digital Restoration series where all these old films are now in digital. Now, these are all shot on film, Chris. How is it possible that I can view these now on digital?
Well, that would be a film scanner.
Okay.
And this is something that actually IU's been researching as part of our media preservation initiative. Basically, a film scanner does exactly what any other scanner does, except it deals with film. So the film is run through the scanner, and every frame is scanned in as an image file in a very high resolution, high color space format, usually either a TIFF or what's called a DPX, Digital Picture Exchange, or the older Cineon format, which is what TIFF came from, or no, went to. There's a relationship between TIFF, DPX, and Cineon. They're kissing cousins. And they have metadata in there that helps with color timing and restoration and all this other stuff. And so you end up with then a folder or directory full of thousands or tens or hundreds of thousands of files. For example, when we created a DCP for Werner Herzog's Fitzcarraldo, and that had just a hair over 226,000 frames, 226,125, I think it was. And what I have on my workstation is this directory. It's actually a whole hard drive that has 226,125 image files in it, DPX files. That's the picture essence of Fitzcarraldo, the movie. So just like on a film, a celluloid-based movie, it's a series of images. They just happen to be on film. And with a digital movie, it's also a series of images. They're just digital files right there. So those are scanned in. Even on modern-day movies that are shot on film, there's still several directors that shoot film, though film is getting harder and harder to source. Kodak has reduced their production when they declare bankruptcy. Fujifilm still makes stuff, but it's harder to get the stock to shoot on it. But even if they shoot film, after it's developed, the first step after that is scanning because they work on a workflow that's called digital intermediate. So with the DI workflow, you scan the film and then you pack it away to preserve it. It gets shipped to a salt mine in Kansas. And they're right there. There's a fun picture of like the Wizard of Oz on a shelf right next to the Goonies. And just in their film cans because the salt mine is dry and it's cool. Which helps preserve the film. But once you've scanned into DI, then you edit on a nonlinear editor. This can be software as simple as like Adobe Premiere or as fairly refined as Avid Media Composer or Quantel Pablo or Nuke and any of these $50,000 pieces of software or something simple like Premiere that's $2,000 or a little bit less. And the movie's cut and edited, and then you can print back to film because there still is film exhibition, of course, in the U.S., but I believe it's really close to tipping over to digital majority or has already tipped over.
I know the number I've heard of for screens is something like 70% of now screens in the U.S. are digital.
So we've gone 70,
Now maybe they're showing twice as many things in the film.
No, I think they have to count the number of physical screens.
Yeah.
They're just looking at projectors and screens that are matched up. So you can still print to film, and oftentimes that's done, again, for archival purposes. Sometimes they'll go to color separation, so they'll have a red, green, blue, sometimes yellow, color separation printed to black and white film that's then shipped off to Kansas, or printed to color stock and then shipped off to Kansas. And then they make a DCP.
Yeah.
Right there. Because it still costs them several $1,000s with bulk discounts, like Universal or MGM. They can probably strike a feature to film for like maybe $3,000, and that's buddy prices. Mm-hmm. To produce, to pack, to encode and create your DCP is about $3,000 for a 90-minute feature. That's kind of the going rate out there. But once you make it, it's a digital file. Mm-hmm. So you make your copies for free. Whereas every single reel of film that you make, you can only ship that to one cinema at a time.
Yeah.
So if you want to release on 1,000 screens, you've just spent 1,000 times 3,000, which is a lot of zeros. Mm-hmm. $300,000, right? I can't do the math. Yeah. Whereas the DCP, you spend $3,000, buy a couple $100 hard drives, and pay the FedEx guy to deliver it to the cinema. So the IU cinema, sometimes if you go downstairs outside of John Vickers' office or Manny Knowles' office, you'll see some big tin cans with reels in them or little red boxes from Deluxe that are the hard drives, and those are the films.
How big are those hard drives typically?
Well, it depends on the feature. So, for example, again, Fitzcarraldo, which is about 2 hours, 34 minutes, I believe, something like that, 2.5 hours, that weighed in as the highest bitrate DCP, came in at 265 gigabytes.
Wow.
So not too bad at all.
Yeah.
A 320 gig hard drive will cover anything other than like Birth of a Nation, right? Because that's like a really long movie.
Yeah. You probably could get away with not – I don't know what the elements are like for Birth of a Nation, but I think you could probably get away with not doing the highest bitrate DCP on Birth of a Nation. But yeah. So let's go back for a second because Werner Herzog's visit – we packed the DCPs. Werner Herzog's like a big-time filmmaker. Why did we pack the DCPs for Werner Herzog?
They had he's a big-time filmmaker that is also very much an independent filmmaker. He doesn't go the studio route for things, though. I mean, he has his Werner Herzog film production company, but he oftentimes, he's a credit card filmmaker. Mm-hmm. And bank loan filmmaker. So they had scanned in and did a digital restoration of 3 of his films, Agere, Wrath of God, Nosferatu. I can't remember the full title of that one. Something of the Vampire. Curse of the Vampire?
No, it's just the vampire, isn't it?
Nosferatu the Vampire. Yep. That was from 1972 and then 1979 and then 1982 was Fitzcarraldo. And they had them scanned and then cleaned up and digitally restored with the intent of releasing a Blu-ray. Mm-hmm. And there was no money left over then to create a DCP because we're talking, a couple $1,000s per title. And just through talking with John Vickers, director at the cinema, he asked us, the Advanced Visualization Lab, and we said, sure, this would be an interesting project. Mm-hmm. And then he offered to Werner Herzog to create the DCPs from the Blu-ray master files that they had generated. And they were like, sure, it's not going to cost us anything. Let's give it a shot. So we had to massage them a little bit because Blu-rays are mastered to a different specification than what's called a DCDM, Digital Cinema Digital Media, DCDM. Yeah. So we had to do a little tweaking of the files. And then we were able to create the DCPs. And if you came to the cinema to see any of those movies, you did see the DCP of those right there. And we actually created 12 copies of these 3 movies. So the 3 movies we received with English and German audio. And in the case of Nosferatu, 2 different picture files because Nosferatu was double shot. Every scene with dialogue was shot in German and in English. So they're different cuts. And we received all those and created then those 6 movies, 6 English, 6 German, unencrypted DCPs that Werner Herzog can have in the studio and do what they want with them because they're unencrypted. They're in the clear. And then we created an additional 6, the exact same, encrypted. And those they can then provide. They're distributed through Dolby London. So with the encrypted DCP and what's called their private key, the private media key, Dolby London can then generate the key delivery message, the KDM, that needs to be shipped out to the exhibitor to unlock the DCP to play it. So they may send the DCP a week ahead of time And you can't do anything. The media block will be like, I don't have the key. I can't unlock this. And it just sits on the media block until the key shows up. And then you plug the key in, and the key has a start date and time and a stop date and time. And it lets you play it during that window, and then it stops it again. So then you just end up deleting the DCP because it's just taking up space and you can't play it again anymore. If you think about how long it takes you to copy files from a hard drive to like an external hard drive to a computer, that's how long it takes to copy DCP, because all this is it's just a portable hard drive, and you plug it into the media block or screen. Media block is what Sony calls it. Screen server is what Dolby calls it. Plug the hard drive in and go and hit copy. And it copies off the hard drive because the hard drive's not fast enough to read back the DCP quickly enough to play it correctly. So you have to copy it to the internal hard drives on the screen server, usually a RAID array, big, so it can read it fast. It needs to sustain 31 megabytes per second of read.
Wow.
Which is right on the upper edge of what home computer equipment, unless you're like a big gamer or whatnot, can handle, or a video editor. I mean, you can do hard drives now that'll sustain many times that, but your average Joe Blow portable hard drive is not going to keep up for 2 hours at that rate.
Yeah, and if you're dealing with something like a solid-state drive, there's no way you're going to have enough space on a solid-state drive to make it worth it to deal with that.
That's why they use RAID arrays of more affordable drives inside the media block.
Yeah. So, what else is the cinema doing? Was this a Werner Herzog only event that we were only going to do the DCP for Werner Herzog, or is this something that now John is offering to filmmakers?
We've actually done these several times. Our initial use of the DCP creation was to support 3D exhibition at the cinema, because while the cinema can play back a multitude of formats in 2D, they can, DVDs, Blu-rays, HD cam tape, digibeta tape, of course, film and a variety of other formats, direct feed from a computer. The only way that we could get 3D playback was through a DCP. So the 3D production class that's taught here in the Department of Telecommunications has been using the DCP features of capabilities of the Advanced Visualization Lab and the IU Cinema for 3 years now. And then we tested with a featurette called Nathan and the Luthier, which was a student production. This has been talked about here. You've had Jake Sherry in here to talk about that. We made a DCP of that. We also, I cannot remember the filmmaker's name, and I apologize, but an independent filmmaker that screened here a movie called Handsome Harry.
Betty Gordon.
Sure.
I think that's it.
We'll go with that. That was a test to see if we could do a feature from an outside source. And that was very successful. So then the next big one was Werner Herzog. Now we're talking there's an opportunity to create DCPs for the Met Opera. Because you may be familiar that for the past several years they've been doing Cinecasts, which is just a satellite link and feed. And John did that up at Notre Dame. And so he's familiar with the program and how it works. And it was attended, and they want to explore that now. But you had to have the special satellite dish and receiver. Basically, it's a DVR. And then if you wanted to time delay anything or time shift – sorry, I keep hitting the cable there. Time shift anything, you had to rely on this DVR, which is really broadcast sort of stuff, which is okay, but he said that sometimes it got a little wonky. So there had been discussion about creating DCPs, but little funding or experience or information about how to do that. So John has talked with us at the Advanced Visualization Lab and is going back to talk with them. And so it'll be a really interesting thing because they would then turn over to us master files that we would pack into DCPs that they could then distribute so people could view things afterwards.
Well, and I would imagine that would make it a lot easier or even more profitable for them to kind of time those when they fit the theater's needs or even their needs. Like, say, they've got an anniversary of some production they want to push out. Seems like
do
that would
a retrospective.
Seems like that would be the way to go. So.
So we're talking about that. It would be a neat chance to put a nice big title card right at the front that says, Digital Cinema Package prepared at Indiana University, IU Cinema, Advanced Visualization Lab, all that fun stuff. So that's another big project coming up. But the idea is that the cinema's mission is, supporting film, including independent film. And sometimes that's best served by creating a DCP. And the Advanced Visualization Lab's mission is to support IU. So we're supporting the cinema, and the cinema is supporting their mission. And there may be some big opportunities. We're growing it. We're ramping it up as a service. We may even see if we can tap into our new supercomputer that's been announced, Big Red 2, which is going to be a massive, massive supercomputer. Processing these video files, well, not video files, these frames, is something that a supercomputer can do very well. It's just a matter of, do we have the right software on it and the right settings for that software to take the DCDM files, the digital media files, and convert them into the type of image file that goes into the DCP. Because if we can speed up that step right there often takes at least 2 to 5 times longer than real time on my workstation, and it's a beastly workstation.
Well, yeah, I mean, I did a couple of the little. I've created the files for DCPs a couple times for you for little intro things
like the
for the cinema.
and stuff,
And it literally like 10 seconds long. It would take like 2 hours or something ridiculous like that. Now they were at 4K for all of those,
Right.
so it took a little bit longer, but it just seemed crazy. But
If we can speed that up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, your initial render, at least to an intermediate format, is still going to be there. We can't really do that because we're not running Premiere or After Effects on Big Red 2.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. Adobe doesn't write software to run on a Cray supercomputer. But once we have that intermediate file, converting it to what's called a JPEG 2000. That's it's a Motion JPEG 2000 code stream, JPEG 2000 code stream that the DCP plays back. And that conversion step from the DPX or TIFF file into the J2C file, that's the monster that takes forever. And that can be massively parallelized on a big supercomputer. So that's something that we're looking to do, that if we can do, it took me 16 hours to pack Fitzcarraldo. And some of that had to do with hard drive read speeds. Actually, all of it had to do with hard drive read speeds. It should have only taken 5 hours. That conversion process on Big Red or Big Red 2, either one of them really, could take a matter of minutes or like 1 hour. And then once we have the J2C code stream, wrapping that into the DCP is also a matter of minutes because that's just the DCP packaging software wrapping the image files into what's called an MXF file. It's a wrapper, and then generating metadata so that the media block, when you load the DCP into the media block, it has information to show the projectionist and to tell itself, oh, it has 6 audio channels. Here's what they are, so I know where to map them. And, oh, it's 2K or it's 4K, things like that.
Yeah. Well, we are getting close on time. I don't want to do another 2-hour episode this week. I don't know how many of those I can do before audience just starts deserting us. But I do want to talk real quick. Let's talk about 48 frames per second, 60 frames per second.
Yes.
Why does it matter?
That's coming up. Well, the blanket term that's being developed out there now is called HFR, high frame rate. Because right now, cinema, since the advent of sound, has been pegged at 24 frames a second. It used to be 18. That's why some older silent movies, when they're played back at 24, everybody moves a little faster than normal, and it's part of the experience there. That's because it was recorded at 18 and hand cranked, so it variables a little bit. But it's been pegged at 24. And 24 frames a second, you can see. You can see that with your naked eye. So projectors have always had to do what's called either double flash or triple flash. So every frame is shown either twice or 3 times at 48 or 72 hertz before advancing to the next frame, to get above the threshold of persistence of vision that the visual system has. Most people peg it at that 48 hertz is good enough, but for all intents and purposes, it's closer to 60 hertz. So a filmmaker, a pioneer in the 70s by the name of Douglas Trumbull, developed a technique that he called show scan, which moved 70 millimeter film through the camera at 60 frames a second. This is also kind of a precursor to IMAX, because IMAX also shoots at 60 frames a second. IMAX film, not IMAX digital. Well, digital could too, but at least on the film side, it's 60 frames a second. And it was really great, but it was ahead of its time because it gobbled up film. Because you're using the film going from 24 to 60, you're using about 3.5 times faster. So that 10-minute reel of film really only gets you about 3.5 minutes.
Yeah.
Right there. So it got very expensive. So it was just before its time, really. But with the advent of digital, you just have to have more storage. But storage is reusable. Once you expose film, you're done with it. You're not going to erase it and use it again. So there have been experiments in it in independent side of things in high frame rate recently, but the big major motion picture has been Peter Jackson shooting his The Hobbit. Really, it's a remake from Ralph Bakshi's Hobbit stuff in the 70s, which is trippy. And yeah, they're shooting at 48 frames a second on that at 5K resolution and in 3D.
Yeah.
So their storage, if they don't, by the end of all three movies, if they don't exceed a couple petabytes of storage, so a petabyte is 1,000 terabytes. A terabyte is 1,000 gigabytes.
Yeah.
So people are used to gigabytes and terabyte drives. Now 1,000 too. So yeah. So we're probably talking 5,000 terabyte drives.
Yeah. The average consumer level hard drive, like a good size hard drive, is like a terabyte and a half, 2 terabytes right now.
Yeah.
And those are about
That would be 10 minutes of
$70, $80.
Yeah.
And that'd be 10 minutes of Hobbit footage. Oh wow. About.
So that's
ridiculous.
That's a reel,
yeah, that's one magazine.
One magazine.
On the old film camera days. So okay, so digital makes it not necessarily more affordable, but certainly more practical. Definitely more practical. And so Regal Cinemas out in the West Coast has refit some of their cinemas to be able to show in high frame rate, which is anything above 24 or 25 frames, because there's a European standard of 25, and that's supported as normal frame rate. But you can go 30, 48, 50, and 60 frames a second as a DCP in 2D. Now, the 3D 48 frames a second is actually an experimental library. So we cannot pack a 48 FPS 3D DCP at IU yet because we have the standard libraries. We can pack the stuff that's established in the Digital Cinema Initiative specification. And they're working on the beta.
Okay.
Right there. So that's going to – depending on how new the projector and media block is in a given cinema, it may just require a software update. And they'll be able to keep up and play high frame rate 3D. But it might require new equipment. So Regal Cinemas is really jumping into this. So they've just released – if you go to their website, you can find this. They have a list – I think it's about 140, 150 screens that are going to be HFR 3D capable. So when you go to see The Hobbit at a Regal cinema, you'll have a huge choice actually, because you could see it at standard frame rate 2D and 3D, high frame rate 2D and 3D, IMAX 2D and 3D.
Wow.
If I remember everything correctly. There's 6 choices right there. But the HFR stuff is really interesting. If you've seen it, people say, oh, it looks like TV, or it's a smooth motion, and it's very different because what we see is the cinematic feel is actually a lack of temporal resolution. You're only getting 24 frames a second, which is really kind of slow in the real world. You know, as far as we perceive the real world, seeing stuff at closer to 60 frames a second, above the threshold of persistence of vision, smooths everything out and is more lifelike, which weirds some people out. So it's very odd.
Weirds me out.
Yeah.
It really does.
Like new TVs have this setting where it'll smooth.
Motion,
I can't watch it.
That's called tweening.
It looks wrong.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes it is wrong. It is actually technically wrong sometimes because it's looking at the frame before and the frame after, and it's generating at least one, sometimes more, interframes between those two actual frames. And it has algorithms to do image analysis, but sometimes it's fooled. Because if there's quick motion or a change in motion on the screen, you can get this little blip that's odd. So the smooth motion or tweening technology is an approximation. True HFR content is something different. I've packed some 60 FPS DCPs. We haven't loaded it in the cinema yet to test it. But the cinema should be capable of playing up to 60 FPS in 2D. Which fits the entire first generation. It's actually called version 1.2 of the DCI specification. And you can go online and download that if you want. It's a publicly available white paper for the tech heads.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
So that's what's going on in 3D, DCPs, high frame rates, IU Cinema, all that fun stuff.
All right. Well, thank you, Chris, so much for telling us all this stuff. We'll have to update this probably every 6 months or so now.
Just about.
We probably waited too long to update this because that's a lot of new information.
Well, that gave me time to actually learn it.
Yes.
So thank you for that.
Well, again, thank you very much. We'll definitely want to talk again when the student 3D class starts up again and
in the spring.
see what they're doing.
Absolutely. And if you get questions like to the blog or the website or anything like that, and just forward them on.
Yeah.
We'll do what we can.
All right. Well, thank you guys very much for listening. I'm Andy.
And I'm Jason.
And I'm Chris.
This has been, and always will be, A Place for Film. A Place for Film is recorded at WFIU Studios in Bloomington, Indiana.